All right, guys, welcome to this week's lecture. This week we're talking about biodiversity and resilience. So here is your vocab for the chapter. You already have that in Quizlet. I just thought I would put it here. I'm not going to go through and read all the definitions, but for the words, we have biodiversity, ecosystem diversity, species diversity, genetic diversity, resilience, resistance, biotic factor, abiotic factor, which are old words, buffer, and ecological succession. Don't worry about writing those down. You can if you think it's going to help you, but you don't have to. The objectives, so what you need to figure out this chapter is you need to be able to list the 3 types of diversity. You need to be able to analyze an ecosystem and determine if it's resilient or not, explain why biodiversity causes an ecosystem to be more resistant to change, and differentiate or tell the difference between resistance and resilience. So for biodiversity, this is going to be the amount of variety in the organisms in an ecosystem. So like how many different things are in an ecosystem. All right, biodiversity is going to influence the ecosystem structure, stability, and function. So ecosystems can do certain things depending on how many different organisms are in it and what types of organisms are in it. There are 3 different types of diversity we're going to talk about. The first is ecosystem diversity, the second is species diversity, and the third is genetic diversity. So ecosystem diversity first. This is going to be a term that we're going to use when we're looking at the variety on the whole planet. So the biosphere is the planet, and we're looking at how many different like ecosystems or habitats or areas are there in our whole planet. So looking at a bigger area and what's the different places to live in that area. Okay, so this refers to the variety of habitats, communities, and ecological processes in the biosphere or on the whole world. And that's what this picture shows, is the whole world and showing the different amounts of biodiversity we have. The second is species diversity. So species diversity is the number of different species in a given area. So a species are, remember, 2 things that can reproduce and have viable offspring. So offspring that are able to have babies themselves. So when we look at these 2 pictures, we can see that community 1, let me get my pen ready. So this community up here, right? See all the different trees? We have tree A, B, like the tall, this one's tall and thin, this one's like a pine tree, right? This is a different type of pine tree. They look different because they're all different species of tree, all right? If we look down at community 2, see how most of them are tree A and we only have a couple of the others? That means community 1 has more species diversity, more different types of species in it, all right? So remember, we're not just talking like a tree versus another plant. We're talking about the different types of trees that are located in there. Does that make sense to everybody? Next is genetic diversity. So this is all the genes that are present in an entire species. So if we look at the whole human species, what is the difference between all of our genomes or all of our DNA, right? So usually there's a lot of diversity. Usually there's a lot of differences in DNA, but what happens is when you have fewer and fewer organisms reproducing, so when organisms inbreed, you get less and less genetic diversity. And genetic diversity is the thing that allows organisms to adapt to a new environment, and it's kind of the fuel for natural selection. It allows organisms to change, right, and not just get killed. So when we have less genetic diversity, we have a less of a chance of organisms being able to survive like catastrophic events. Does that make sense? Like think of corona, right? And how they say people who have type O blood don't get it as bad as other people, right? Well, the fact that we have different types of blood is genetic diversity, okay? The problem comes in is that if I have O blood, which I do, right? If my husband had O blood, then all of our children are going to have O blood. There's no genetic diversity there, right? Now let's pretend like that we're the only ones on the earth. Then all the population would end up with O blood if they all came from those 2 people, right? So they would all live. But if there was no O blood, then everyone would die, right? So let's say the first 2 people, like if we had like a population on an island where 2 people had A blood and B blood, there's not going to be any O blood on that island. And if that island got corona, the whole island would die. Does that make sense? Right? So look at the picture. We have a whole bunch of bats here that are all different colors, but the only ones that got through this tunnel are the blue bats and the greenish bats. So the new population only is bluish green, right? there's not as much genetic diversity, which makes them unable to adapt to a changing environment. We'll talk about that when we get into evolution and stuff like that, but that's the fuel of it. Biodiversity and stability. So what we were just talking about, right, is an example of biodiversity and stability. So the more biodiversity you have, the more stable you get. Environmental stability is the fact that a stable environment does not experience unexpected large changes in its characteristics across time. Meaning, if I look at a forest, if I come back in 100 years, as long as there's a lot of variety in the forest will still be pretty much the same. Okay. If an ecosystem is stable, it's able to recover from disturbances at a faster rate. So it's able to be more resilient, right? Meaning it can come back, because that's what resilience is, the ability to come back at a faster rate. How well it recovers is determined by its resilience, which is its ability to recover from a disturbance, or its resistance, which is the ability to withstand the disturbance. All right, so if we look at this picture, let's talk about this picture. This picture here, my first community is a diverse community. I have blue and green dots. In the warm years, the green dots do better, right? I have more of these green dots, right, and less of the blue ones. But there are still a few blue ones. There's just not a lot, right? And then in the cold years, my blue ones do better, but I still have a few green ones. My population overall is still large, right? I still have a lot of individuals in the population. My population is still quite stable. It still has kind of the same characteristics. If I look at my blue dot species, right, these guys do good in cold years. So if I look at them here, we have a good amount of individuals. In the warm year, a lot die out, and my population is becoming really low. It's not able to withstand that. It doesn't have much resilience. It doesn't have much resistance, right? It can't withstand that. But in my cold year, I have a lot of blue dots, right? And it does really well. But that's not really a stable ecosystem because it can't maintain itself. And the same with my green dots. My green is just opposite, that it does better in the warm years, right? So in the warm years, I have a ton. But in my cold year over here, right, I don't have that many, and my population gets really low. Okay, so those are not stable ecosystems. My first one, the diverse community, is, okay? My last definition is tolerance, and the tolerance is the conditions that an organism can withstand and still be alive and reproduce, function like the organism should. Okay, that's its tolerance.